Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for 12/31/2018. It's 1 o'clock in the morning and I can't sleep. So I'm going to move on to Godfather Part 2. I guess the bottom line for the Godfather Part 2 is I like it better than the first film. I think Michael gets punished more so here. And then I really like the intercutting in this film. So if you've never seen The Godfather, actually, let me pause there. Let me just talk about institutionally. One of the things that's sort of fun, trivial, Robert De Niro is the first person ever to win an Oscar for a performance where he's playing a character that a person won an Oscar for, because he's playing Vito, a younger Vito, and Marlon Brando won, so he got Best Supporting Actor, which is kind of fun. And then the other thing that's sort of fun is Al Pacino is the first one of the few actors to be nominated for multiple characters. I've actually believe Bells of St. Mary is the other one. Anyway, Godfather 2. There's always been this debate about which one's better. I like Godfather 2 mainly because of sort of the moral issue, because I still kind of feel like, and I said this in my other review, that Godfather, that's almost bemoaning the perversion of tradition by modernity, as opposed to just portraying these the mafia as just morally corrupt people. It's almost as if time has corrupted the mafia, whereas in fact the mafia is just a corrupt institution. So anyway, let me bring up the trailer and clips. I'll see you in a sec. Okay, so The Godfather is actually bifurcated into two separate storylines by time periods. It's the story of Vito first forming his criminal empire, and then Michael getting embroiled in another conspiracy against him. And they're roughly the same age, because Michael's about 30 and Vito's about 30 in terms of the narrative. And the movie cuts back and forth between these two storylines. And as a matter of fact, when they first edited the film together, there was more intercutting. And George Lucas himself was involved in it, and he said, you got two movies here, cut one of them. And there's actually a TV edit that puts it in chronological order. But in any case, in my mind, the intercutting makes this film because it's specifically the ironies and tension between Michael destroying his family while Vito is trying to pull it up. Because famously, obviously, this movie ends with, I guess spoilers, Michael killing Fredo, because Fredo accidentally betrayed him, or moronically betrayed him, however you want to look at it, and everything like that. And these juxtapositions between the two segments are really powerful, because it really gives the film a deep sense of irony. And especially since, in context of this being a prequel and a sequel, Vito's main desire was for Michael to escape, because he was his favorite, escape the mafia lifestyle. Anyway, so this scene right here, this is probably my favorite scene involving Vito. This is the first time he kills, basically, because that guy is a local mafia boss who's because Vito is a petty criminal at this point and he has to pay, and so his solution to the situation is to kill him, and he has it. And so there's just something about how this is directed. This film is actually much better directed than the first one. There's something very seductive about this, with the use of the light to set up. It makes the scene very effective, and then the juxtaposition of the festival outside reminds you of sort of the juxtaposition between the darkness and the opening, the darkness in between the wedding and the first one. And the other reason, excuse me, I really like this scene is it shows, in a sense, that Michael is his father's son, despite the fact that Vito's main concern was to get Michael out of the lifestyle, because this killing is very cold and very, very calculated, because he hides like the gunshot sound with the tull, and then he times it with the fireworks, and everything like that, and eventually he'll break the gun apart and throw it down different chimneys, which is all very a very father-like son. And the movie never actually really spells that out for you. It just sort of demonstrates it, and that's really sort of the ideal form of filmmaking, because the old saying is show not tell, and that Vito being like Michael, as represented by this cold calculated killing, is a point that hangs over this film, both because of the end, both because of it being a sequel to the first one, but also sort of the intertextuality I was talking about with the intercutting. That it's really powerful in this particular moment, coming right here when they're sitting down on the steps. I think it's one of the most poignant shots in the entire trilogy, because of how it's iconic. Because it feels very much like an immigrant family and experiencing America with the American flag, when everything like that. And then he's going to say, I love you, Michael, very, very much, in Italian. And it just, to me, it's sort of the summarization, the summary of the entire trilogy. And then also, just as a matter of story structure, this is the first half climax. And in a sense, because the movie ends with Fredo being killed on Michael's orders. And in a sense, because you're telling these two different stories running in parallel, and they're not really they're not obvious how they causally affect each other, but you get a sense that if Vito made a different decision and he just paid Fanucci, the mafia guy, the $200 or whatever, that Michael would never have killed Fredo, and their lives would be incredibly different. And so you kind of get the sense, because this is the first act climax of Michael killing Vito killing that guy, that Michael killing Fredo has already been caused here. Okay, so this scene right here is my favorite scene in the entire trilogy, because, again, I think it's really important thematically or morally that Michael gets punished, because Michael is not an admirable man. And the movie absolutely does have the theme, the wages of sin are death, but it's not, sometimes it's a little bit, in the first one especially, and I don't think the main reason why part 3 I think is justified, in the sense is Michael doesn't quite get punished enough in the first 2, and the third one, even though it's a step down from everything else, is justified because of his death scene, which I'm actually going to show. Now, this scene, so this scene is Kay, and Kay's Michael's wife, and she had a miscarriage. For at least Michael thinks it was a miscarriage. And one of the reasons why I like this scene as much as I do is I actually think there's a funny plot hole type thing that's sort of implicit within this scene, which I think it's not really a plot hole. I'm not criticizing the writing. I think if you're not really engaging with the film on a deep level, you might find it a little bit weird, because of Kay's going to eventually tell Michael that she's leaving, blah blah blah, and that she's had an abortion, which isn't necessarily the smartest thing to do, because Michael has killed or had killed multiple men and everything like that, and setting aside like the ethics of abortion, Michael's going to see this as a personal attack, and he doesn't eventually hit her, everything like that. So you might wonder if she it seems reckless from her perspective to tell him this, unless in the same room, because in a sense she was supposed to be like, you would imagine that he would kill her, or that might be a legitimate fear. And Kay is not portrayed as reckless, but at the same time, so that's like, you can, if you're not dealing with the film on a deep level, you might have that thought. But if you are dealing with it on a deep level, at this point, Kay is, in my interpretation, is just past the point of caring. And so her goal is to hurt Michael as much as she can, and which is one of the reasons why she keeps saying the word abortion. And she, Diane Keaton actually stresses abort when she says the word. And so because of that, I really like this scene. I used to teach this scene in class because it's a really good demonstration of the difference between text and subtext, because in terms of text, Kay's motivation, what she's trying to do here, is to get away from Michael and then protect her kids. That's her obtrusable goal. That's what she says at the beginning of the scene. I'm going now. I'll see you. I'm taking the kids, blah, blah, blah. And that's her goal. That's what she says, but that's not what her actual goal is. Her actual goal, because if that was her actual goal, she did this in a very foolish way. Because not only is she lucky, like, Michael didn't kill her, he would never let her go, and she had to have known that. But if her goal was to hurt him and humiliate him as much as she possibly could, having her kids right outside the door, and Rocco and other staff, and then her saying, and by the way, I aborted your second son, excuse me, drove him to hit her. I shouldn't say it that way, because that makes it sound like she's egging him on, which is not what I want. Oh, it's not the implication I'm trying to say. Like, she's just doing her best to hurt her, and there's something profoundly powerful about Diane Keaton's performance, and then Kay's decision here, that, like, there's not much that there's very little that could have happened that would have actually really hurt Michael, but this is like the one thing that would have done it. Now, as a point of reference, neither Coppola nor Puzo came up with it. They wrote the scene, but this story development was not from them. It was actually by Connie, the woman, Tila Shira, who is Francis Ford Coppola's sister. He was talking to her, and he was stuck stuck with what should happen. Basically, he wasn't even on the script writing phase. He was basically outlining the story, and he was sort of stuck. He wasn't entirely sure how to resolve Kay's and Michael's story, and she ended up saying, well, she could have an abortion. And he immediately wrote it down, and he always the way in which him and Puzo worked, he would write it, and then he would write it back. They would go back and forth, and as soon as Puzo story, he's like, we can't do that. He's like, it's the only thing that makes sense. And eventually they gave in. Anyway, so this scene right here, this is not Godfather Part 2. It's Godfather Part 3. Now, as I was saying before, Godfather Part 3 is obviously the lesser of the weakest of the three films, though, as a point of reference, I actually enjoy it the most. The main problem is Mary, the character, is very badly played by Sofia Coppola because she can't act. But also, that entire relationship is sort of underdeveloped and feels ad hoc afterwards, especially since the climax is her dying. And overall, the script is one step below. The direction's actually, I think, better here than in Part 1, but the script is one or two notches below the other two scripts, mainly because Coppola was rushed while doing it. Anyway, but in my mind, Part 3 is completely justified, not by the scene you're watching right here, or not entirely by the scene right here. It's specifically Michael Corleone's death, because, and this is why I showed Vito's death in my part 1 video, because Michael's gonna end up, you're gonna see him dancing with 3 women. Mary, his daughter, and then Apollo, his first wife, right there. And then also Kay, right there. And it's actually parts 3, 1, and 2. So it also works as a summation like that. This is easily the best scene in part 3. The only other scene that kind of competes with it is the confession scene where he's talking to John Paul, the Pope. And he's confessing they killed his brother. Anyway, so this scene, right? Ow! What are you doing? Sorry, the cat was biting me. This scene right here is why I think part 3 is 1 needed, 2 absolutely justified apart from anything else. Is Michael being such a terrible man morally, his just desserts is to die alone. And I guess that idea is already sort of implicit within part 2. But I personally don't find it enough, and it's this scene right here, which I don't find all that sad. And the juxtaposition between how Michael dies with basically just animals, and then Vito dying with at least his grandson, I think it's absolutely needed. Because otherwise, the parts 1 and 2 have a, yay, Michael won quality to them. Where part 3 says, actually makes the point, no, he didn't win. He lost his soul. And so, despite the fact that part 3 isn't... I mean, again, that's sort of implicit in part 2, but part 3 really fleshes it, because at part 2, he's basically a zombie at the end, and he's completely emotionally shut down. But for part 3 to demonstrate it the way it did, I feel it needed that operatic edge, because it's not so much the Godfather saga glorifies the mafia. It's that Michael was not punished enough. And I'm really glad that they made part 3, despite Mary, despite everything else. Anyway, so that's going to be it for Cubs and Culture. See you guys tomorrow.